No one ever knocked at Blackridge Hall. The gates were meant to keep the world out. Tall, black iron things older than Dominic Wren himself, crowned with curling metal thorns and guarded by a long gravel road that wound like a silver ribbon through the misty trees. Deliveries went to the side entrance. Visitors didn't come at all. So when the sound came, sharp, solid, 3 quick raps, Dominic froze. He had just finished his morning espresso in the library, seated near the tall window where the fog licked at the glass like an old ghost. The silence in the house, as always, was absolute. Even the wind outside knew better than to stir too loudly. Blackridge was a place built for solitude, for forgetting, for keeping things buried. But the knock was real. Not the metallic buzz of the gate intercom, not the polite press of a doorbell. A human hand, knocking, at his front door. Dominic set the porcelain cup down on its saucer and rose slowly. His joints ached less than they used to, thanks to the morning swims and the weekly visits from that silent physiotherapist who never made small talk, but he still felt every year of the 52 he carried. He passed through the hall where the old portraits hung. None were family, just faces he'd bought at auction. He liked them better that way, hollow-eyed strangers with secrets as heavy as his. At the door, he paused. The knocker was still. The fog pressed in from the other side of the glass panes. He opened it. There, on the stone landing, stood a boy. Maybe 10 years old, soaking wet, dripping from the ends of his sleeves, his hood down, brown hair matted to his forehead. A backpack, dark blue and scuffed, sat beside his feet. But it wasn't the water or the silence or the suddenness of him that hit Dominic hardest. It was the eyes. They were steady, unflinching, dark, like his own. "Mr. Wren?" the boy asked, voice calm. "Dominic Wren?" Dominic narrowed his eyes. "Yes." The boy took one breath, then said it. "My name's Eli. I think I'm your son." The world tilted, not with noise, not with shock, but with a kind of internal unraveling, like a cello string pulled too tight, finally snapping in silence. Dominic didn't move. Eli didn't either. It was the boy's calm that unsettled him. The way he didn't tremble, didn't flinch, didn't look unsure. He just stood there like someone who already knew the ending, and was only here to see how long it took Dominic to admit it. "I'm sorry," Dominic said slowly, voice clipped. "You must be confused." "No," Eli said. "I'm not." Dominic glanced past him, expecting, hoping for an adult, a woman, a car, but the road was empty, eaten by the fog. Eli followed his gaze. "I came alone. Bus dropped me off down the hill. I walked." "You walk," Dominic echoed. "About half a mile." Eli scratched the back of his head. "You have a long driveway." Dominic opened his mouth, but the questions tangled inside his throat. How did he get here? Who sent him? What game was this? But another part of him, the part that knew things before the facts caught up, was already listening to the boy's voice, already clocking the shape of his jaw, the stubborn set of his mouth. It was like looking in a mirror. "I don't know your mother," Dominic said. "Yes," Eli said simply. "You do." Something in Dominic's stomach tightened, and then the boy reached into his soaked backpack and pulled out an envelope, wrinkled, watermarked. He handed it over without fanfare. Inside was a single photograph and a DNA report. Dominic stared at the paper in his hand. A name, a lab, a result. 99.998% paternal match, and the photo, an old one, clearly scanned from a printed image. A woman standing on a dock, holding a toddler, smiling. Marla. Dominic's chest went still. It had been over a decade, maybe 12 years since they'd last spoken. It hadn't ended in fire or screaming or betrayal. Just a quiet goodbye, an agreement, or so he thought, to leave things where they were. She had called him cold. He had called her dramatic, but he'd never known, never even heard. Eli watched him. "She didn't tell you, I figured." Dominic's fingers tightened around the envelope. "When did she?" 4 months ago, Eli said softly. "Car accident." And there it was. That final door slamming shut inside his chest. "Why are you here?" Dominic asked. Eli shrugged. "Nowhere else to go. You must have family, someone." "No one left," Eli said. "Just this." He lifted the backpack slightly. "And you?" Dominic stepped back, just one step, enough to feel the cool marble of the foyer under his feet. "I'm not equipped for this," he said. "I don't need anything," Eli replied. "I'm not here for your money. I just wanted to know who you were. What kind of man would walk away?" "That's not fair." "Neither is losing a mom at 10, Eli said. The silence stretched between them, taut and sharp. Dominic's throat burned. The boy stood in it, in that space where shame and confusion live, and didn't budge. His presence filled the doorway like rain fills silence. Steady. Unapologetic. Dominic finally said, "You should come inside." "I'm wet," Eli replied. "Then come inside before you catch something." Eli stepped in. He didn't look around with awe or wonder. He didn't comment on the marble floors or the spiral staircase or the old grandfather clock ticking faintly down the hall. He just walked forward, like he'd already been here before. Like this place was simply another house. Dominic closed the door. For a moment, the world held its breath. And then Blackridge Hall, silent for years, began to stir again. Eli followed Dominic through the hall in silence, shoes squeaking slightly with each soggy step. The boy didn't ask where they were going. He didn't ask anything at all. Dominic wasn't sure why, but that unnerved him more than any amount of screaming or sobbing might have. They entered the sitting room just off the main hall. Tall ceilings, stone fireplace, 2 aging leather armchairs facing a wide bay window with no view today but fog. Dominic gestured. "Sit." Eli dropped his backpack, shrugged off the dripping hoodie, and sat in one motion. Beneath the hoodie was a t-shirt with a faded graphic and sleeves that hung too long on his arms. He looked too small for this room, too young for this moment, too quiet for someone carrying a revelation that had just split the world in half. Dominic poured tea from the set he hadn't used in years. 1 cup, no sugar. He offered it to the boy. Eli took it with a small nod. "Thanks." They sat for a long time sipping in silence. Outside, the fog began to lift, just a little, enough to reveal the bare tips of the trees, the long gravel path that snaked into the woods. "You said she never told me," Dominic said finally. Eli nodded. "Why?" "I don't know. She didn't talk about you much." Dominic raised an eyebrow. "But she gave you that report." Eli looked down at his tea. "I found it. After she died. It was in a drawer with some photos. I guess she was going to send it." Something shifted in Dominic's chest. "What was she like?" he asked before he could stop himself. Eli looked up. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There was no cinematic pause, no swelling music, just a boy holding a teacup, remembering the person who mattered most in his world. She was tired a lot, but she laughed easy. She could fix anything, not with money, with her hands. The coffee machine, my bike, a broken drawer. She loved thunderstorms, hated Christmas songs, and she made grilled cheese better than anyone. Dominic swallowed hard. "And what do you want from me?" he asked, voice a little rough. Eli blinked. "Nothing." Dominic frowned. "Then why are you here?" "I wanted to see," Eli said. "What kind of man leaves a woman like her behind?" The words hit like cold water. Dominic stood. "I think you should get some rest. There's a guest room on the east side. Rosa will make up a bed." Eli didn't move. "Are you angry?" Dominic didn't answer. "Because I didn't ask to be here," Eli said. "But I'm here, and I'm not going back." Dominic's fists clenched slightly at his sides. "You have school?" "Suspended," Eli replied. "For punching a kid who said something about my mom." Dominic blinked. "What'd he say?" "He said she probably died drunk. That's what the paper said. But she wasn't drunk. She swerved to miss a deer." The boy's voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It was just true. Dominic didn't know what to say. He left the room. That night, Dominic stood in the hallway outside the guest room and listened to the silence. He expected soft sobs, or maybe the sound of drawers opening, the boy rummaging, exploring, but there was nothing. He opened the door just enough to peek in. Eli lay in the bed, curled on his side, hoodie balled under his head like a pillow. The real pillows remained untouched. The boy hadn't even pulled the covers up. Dominic stepped back and closed the door. In his own bedroom, he sat by the fire and stared at the photograph Eli had left on the nightstand. Marla, she looked younger than he remembered. The smile was real. The way her arm curled around the toddler, Eli, no doubt, was full of warmth. Protection. Love. She'd done it all without him, and now she was gone. The next morning, Eli was already in the kitchen when Dominic came down. He was making toast. One slice already burnt. "You could have asked Rosa," Dominic said. "She was asleep. I didn't want to bother her." Dominic opened his mouth to respond, but instead reached for the kettle. They ate in silence, until Eli said, "Why didn't you look for us?" Dominic stopped mid-sip. "I didn't know there was an us." "But you knew about her." "Yes. And you let her go?" Dominic turned. "She wanted to go." "Did you ask her to stay?" The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. No, Dominic said. Eli nodded like that answered everything. Are you gonna make me leave? He asked. Dominic looked at him. No. Good. And with that, the boy finished his toast, stood up, and wandered out of the kitchen like he belonged there. That night, when Dominic passed the guest room again, the bed was made, the window cracked open. But Eli wasn't inside. Panic kicked into his chest. He searched the hall, then the yard, then the garden. He found him in the conservatory, the glass-roofed room filled with plants Rosa had tried to keep alive. Eli sat cross-legged on the old chaise lounge, looking up at the stars through the misted roof. You're not where you're supposed to be, Dominic said. Eli shrugged. Neither are you. Dominic exhaled, and for the first time in years, he sat beside someone without feeling the urge to stand back up. Eli didn't say anything more. He just leaned slightly, not into Dominic, but toward him. Close enough that if Dominic reached out, he could touch his shoulder. He didn't, but he didn't move away either. The days after Eli arrived passed like a fogged mirror, everything familiar, yet distorted. Dominic Wren had lived alone for so long, his home had become a reflection of himself, controlled. Every object had its place, every room its silence. Now there were signs of disruption. Damp sneakers left near the door, a half-eaten apple on the kitchen counter, the faint scent of soap and rain trailing through the halls. Eli wasn't loud. He didn't run through rooms or slam doors, but his presence vibrated. It pushed against the stillness of Blackridge Hall like a note held just off-key. Dominic wasn't sure what unnerved him more, the suddenness of the boy's arrival or the way he made it feel like he'd always belonged. Eli had said very little since that first night. He didn't ask questions, didn't press, but he watched, closely. Every time Dominic passed through a room, he felt the boy's eyes following him, like a puzzle halfway solved. On the third morning, Dominic came down early. The fog outside hadn't lifted. The house was still. And yet, there Eli was, already seated at the breakfast table, toast on his plate, juice poured, reading a battered paperback he must have pulled from one of the lower shelves. You don't sleep in? Dominic asked, pouring his coffee. Eli shrugged. Hard to sleep in strange places. You slept like a rock the first night. I was exhausted. Dominic took a seat across from him. He studied the boy in the low morning light. Still too thin, still too quiet, but alert in a way most 10-year-olds weren't. Eli turned a page, then looked up. Can I ask you something? Dominic gave a wary nod. Go ahead. Did you ever love her? The question landed like a stone dropped in a pond. No ripples, just the heavy sinking of truth. Dominic didn't speak for a moment. He wrapped his hands around his mug. Yes, he said at last. Then why didn't you stay? Dominic's jaw worked. He looked down at the dark swirl of his coffee. Because love isn't always enough. We were different people, different lives, different goals. Was I one of those goals? Dominic met his eyes. I didn't know you existed. Eli studied him. That's not an answer, Dominic sighed. If I had known, I don't know. The boy didn't flinch. That's honest. He looked back down at his book. For a while, that was all, until he said, without looking up, Do you remember her last name? Dominic blinked. Marla Vance. No, Eli said, that's what she used. Her real name was Marla Fenwick. Dominic froze. That name had dust on it, buried in the corners of memory he'd locked up years ago. Fenwick? He echoed. Eli nodded. She changed it after she left New York, didn't want to be traced. The air in the kitchen thickened. Dominic stood slowly, set down his mug. Excuse me. He walked out. In his office, Dominic sat behind the massive desk and stared at nothing. Marla Fenwick. That name wasn't just memory. It was blood and ink and scandal. Years ago, before he built Blackridge, before the towers and the private jets, Dominic Wren had been a different man. A hungrier man. A man who took risks that danced too close to ruin. Marla had been the beginning of that end. They'd met when he was just making his name, an architect with dreams far bigger than his budget. She was a journalist, sharp-eyed, too curious, too good at seeing through charm. They collided like flint and steel. She'd followed a lead, suspected one of his early projects had been built on bribed permits and false soil reports. She wasn't wrong. Instead of denying it, Dominic had dared her to get closer, to prove it. She had. And then something strange happened. They'd fallen in love. It hadn't made sense. It didn't need to. Two people with jagged edges and too much pride, finding something soft between them. But pride wins, eventually. When the report was about to go public, Dominic had tried to stop her. Not with threats, just with words. She left, and he buried everything. He rebuilt his empire, bigger, cleaner. He scrubbed the past and never looked back, until now. Eli was back in the conservatory again that evening. He sat in the same spot, knees tucked to his chest, watching the fog bleed into starlight through the glass. Dominic stood in the doorway for a long time before speaking. "You knew who I was before you came," he said. Eli nodded. "You knew what I'd done." Another nod. "Why come?" Eli looked over at him. "Because you're still my father." Dominic's throat tightened. "I wasn't a good man," he said. "Marla said you tried? She told you that?" "She said he wasn't evil, just afraid." Dominic looked down at the floor. "She never told me your name," he said. "Never tried to reach out. She said if you wanted to be found, you'd show up." Dominic sat down beside him, slower this time. "I didn't think she'd ever forgive me," he said quietly. "She never did," Eli replied. There was no malice in it, just truth. Dominic nodded. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Eli reached into his hoodie and pulled something out, a folded piece of newspaper. Dominic took it. It was Marla's obituary, clean, simple, no mention of him. But there, near the bottom, a single sentence. "She is survived by her son, Eli." No mention of the father. Dominic's hand tightened on the paper. "I'm sorry," he said, voice low. Eli didn't respond. Blackridge Hall was the kind of place that seemed to breathe. At night, the walls creaked just enough to suggest footsteps. The wind slid through the chimneys like whispers in a language no one spoke anymore. Rooms stayed locked, not because they had to be, but because no one dared to ask what was behind them. Eli didn't seem bothered by any of it. In fact, he wandered. Each morning, Dominic would find some new trace of the boy in rooms that hadn't been entered in years. A dusty candlestick shifted slightly. A hallway window cracked open. A book pulled from the third shelf in the library and tucked under Eli's arm like treasure. It should have annoyed him. Should have set off the old instinct for control. But it didn't. It unsettled him in a different way. Because Eli wasn't reckless, he wasn't a vandal. He explored like a historian, like someone trying to learn the story of a place no one had bothered to tell him. On the fifth morning, Dominic found him standing in front of the old piano. The lid was up, the keys exposed. Eli didn't touch them, he just stared. "She used to play," he said without turning around. Dominic paused in the doorway. "Marla?" Eli nodded. "Only 2 songs, one sad, one angry. I never learned the names." Dominic walked over slowly. "I bought this after she left. It hasn't been played since." Eli finally turned to him. "Then why keep it?" Dominic didn't have an answer. That afternoon, Eli found the attic. Rosa tried to stop him, but Eli had a way of slipping through spaces before anyone could pin him down. Dominic came home from a meeting to find the boy sitting cross-legged on the attic floor, surrounded by boxes. "What are you doing up here?" Dominic asked. Stepping through the low-ceilinged doorway, Eli looked up, holding something in his lap. A black-and-white photograph in a cracked frame. "Looking," he said. Dominic's stomach dropped. "For what?" Eli turned the photo around. "I think I found it." It was an old picture. Dominic in his 20s, smiling in a way he didn't remember knowing how to smile. Next to him, Marla, eyes laughing, fingers caught in mid-motion as if reaching for him. He took the photo, stared at it. "I thought I got rid of this." Eli tilted his head. "Why would you?" "Because it hurt to remember." Eli looked around the attic. "That's a lot of hurt to carry." Dominic sighed. "Come on. Let's go downstairs." Eli didn't move. "Can I ask you something?" Dominic braced himself. "Yes." "Did you leave her before she was pregnant or after?" Dominic sat down slowly beside him. "Before," he said. "We were already done." "Did she try to tell you?" Dominic was quiet for a long time. "I don't know. Maybe. I didn't want to hear anything by then." Eli nodded. "That's what I figured." There was no accusation in his voice, no anger, just a kind of calm conclusion like a detective closing a notebook. Dominic looked at the boxes, so many sealed pieces of his past, taped up and stacked like coffins. "Have you found anything else?" Eli reached for a smaller box, lifted the lid. Inside were letters. Not from Marla, these were from Dominic's father, unread. Dozens. "You never opened them?" Eli asked. "No." "Why?" "Because he left. And you hated him for it." Dominic met his eyes. Eli didn't flinch. "You see the pattern?" he asked softly. Dominic closed the lid. "I do now." The next day, Eli didn't come down for breakfast. By mid-morning, Dominic went looking. He found him in the greenhouse. It had been locked for years. Rosa gave up maintaining it sometime after the second winter. Dominic refused to visit it. Now vines choked the glass, and the path was half buried in moss and dead leaves. But the boy had found a way in. Eli was crouched in the far corner, brushing dust off a wooden box. Dominic approached slowly. "How'd you get in?" "Window latch," Eli said. "It was rusted, but I figured it out." Dominic crouched beside him. "What is that?" Eli opened the box. Inside were things Dominic hadn't seen in over a decade. An old journal, a dried corsage, a photograph of Blackridge Hall half-built, scaffolding still hugging its bones. "She came here once," Eli said. "With you." Dominic nodded slowly. "She hated it." "Too quiet," Eli said. "She wrote that in her journal." "You read it?" "Only the parts about you." Dominic ran a hand through his hair. "What did she say?" "That you were always trying to build something that couldn't fall apart, and that in doing so, you pushed away everything that made you feel alive." Dominic closed the box. "That sounds like her." That night, Dominic didn't sleep. He walked the halls of Blackridge like a man haunted, because now he wasn't just hearing ghosts, he was seeing them. In the shape of a boy's hands. In the way Eli sat on the staircase, same as Marla used to, barefoot and reading under the hall light. In the questions Eli asked and the silences he didn't fill. Dominic sat in the library staring at the fire until Eli came in and curled up in the armchair opposite him. "I'm not trying to hurt you," the boy said quietly. Dominic looked up. "I know, but I want to understand." Dominic nodded. Eli leaned forward. "Why did you name this place Blackridge?" Dominic hesitated. "It was the name of the hill where I buried my dog as a kid." Eli blinked. "That's kind of dark." Dominic laughed, a sound that surprised them both. "I guess I wanted to name something after grief, and make it beautiful." Eli smiled faintly. "I think it worked," he said, and in the quiet that followed, Dominic realized something. The boy wasn't here to punish him. He was here to give him a second chance, even if neither of them quite knew how to take it. Dominic Wren had rules. Unwritten, quiet, sharp-edged rules. And for most of his life, those rules kept everything manageable, predictable. But Eli didn't follow them. He didn't ask permission to stay longer than a night. He didn't knock before entering rooms. He didn't pretend Dominic's silence meant go. Instead, he just stayed. He started leaving his things places. His hoodie on the banister, his sketchbook on the stairs, his socks on the radiator like they belonged there. Dominic told himself it annoyed him. But every time he picked something up, he realized he wasn't angry. He was afraid. Eli was making a home inside a house that hadn't felt like one in years. On a Wednesday morning, Rosa cornered Dominic in the kitchen. "He needs a school," she said flatly, hands on her hips. Dominic frowned. "He's not staying." She raised a brow. "Are you sure?" He wasn't. Rosa sighed. "He's eating breakfast at the table, helping me clean the porch, reading your damn books. He's staying, Dominic." Dominic rubbed his temples. "It's not that simple," she softened. "He's not asking for a crown, just a pencil and a desk." Dominic exhaled. "Fine, I'll look into it." They visited the local academy the next day. Eli sat across from the headmaster, calm and articulate, answering questions like he was 40 years old. He talked about his favorite books, his late mother, his current living situation. Dominic sat behind him, stunned. Afterward, in the car, Dominic asked, "How did you learn to talk like that?" Eli smirked. "YouTube. And I used to watch my mom argue with landlords." Dominic laughed despite himself. One evening, Dominic found Eli in the east wing, the oldest part of the house. He was staring at a painting. A large one hung crookedly on the far wall. It was of Dominic's grandfather, a man with cold eyes and a colder legacy. "You look like him," Eli said. Dominic didn't answer. "Is that why you left my mom?" the boy asked. "Because you were afraid you'd become him?" Dominic's mouth opened, then closed. "Yes," he said finally. Eli turned. "You didn't?" The next morning, a courier delivered a package. Inside was a faded envelope, no return address. Dominic opened it slowly. Inside, a photograph, a baby, wrapped in a green blanket, eyes wide, familiar. On the back, Marla's handwriting. "I didn't send this one, I should have, but you should know he looked like you even then." Dominic sat down. Hard. He stared at the photo until the sunlight moved across the room. Then he picked it up and walked to Eli's room. The garden had been left to rot. Once it had been Marla's idea, a little corner of Blackridge where something could grow. She hadn't liked the house, not really. Too big. Too cold. But she'd tried to claim the greenhouse as her own. Dominic had let her. He never visited it after she left, so when he found Eli there again, this time kneeling by an overturned planter, sleeves rolled up and dirt smudged on his cheek, it felt like watching the past resurrect itself. "You digging for treasure?" Dominic asked. Eli looked up. "Kind of." Dominic walked closer. The scent of damp earth filled the space, cut with something older, rust, decay, time. "What is this?" he asked. Eli pulled a wooden box from beneath the soil. "I found a latch under the stones, thought it was just a broken pipe." Dominic knelt. The box was worn, old, but familiar. He lifted the lid. Inside, letters. Dozens of them, folded carefully, all in Marla's handwriting. They sat on the stone bench near the greenhouse wall as Dominic opened the first. "Dom, I'm writing these because I don't know what else to do, because every time I think about calling you, something inside me says not to. I don't want to ruin what little we didn't break. But he looks like you. He has your eyes, and he asks questions like you did when you were trying to learn the bones of buildings." Dominic's hands shook. Eli said nothing. Just watched. He opened another. "He's stubborn like me, but quieter. Sometimes I catch him staring at the sky like he's waiting for something to land. Maybe it's you. I don't know. Maybe I'm waiting too." Another. I told him stories. About a man who used to draw buildings on napkins and talk about cities like they were living things. I didn't say your name, but he asked if the man was his father. And I didn't lie. I just said the story wasn't finished yet. Dominic folded the letter. His throat burned. "I never got these," he whispered. "She never sent them," Eli said, "but she kept writing until the last one." Dominic reached for it. The ink was shaky, the paper more worn. "I think it's too late now, but if you ever meet him, please don't lie. Tell him I tried. Tell him he was always wanted, even when I didn't know how to give him everything. And if you can, try to stay, just long enough for him to know what that feels like." Dominic put the letter down. He stared at the floor. "I was cruel," he said. Eli's voice was soft. "You were scared." Dominic looked up. "Aren't you angry?" Eli shrugged. "I was. Now I'm just here." They sat in silence. Then Dominic asked, "Do you want to keep them?" Eli shook his head. "They're for you." Dominic nodded. "I'll read them all." Eli stood. "I know." That night Dominic pulled out an old journal. He hadn't written in years. He'd always seen it as a weakness, reflection, feeling. But now, he wrote. About the greenhouse, about the letters, about the boy who kept staying no matter how many walls he'd built. And when he was done, he placed the photo of baby Eli between the pages, his son. It was raining again, soft and steady like a heartbeat. The kind of rain that blanketed everything in silence. The kind of morning that made Blackridge Hall feel even bigger, even emptier. Dominic woke to quiet. Eli's room was empty. His bed made, his backpack gone. For a moment, Dominic just stood there, unsure whether he was dreaming, or worse, whether this had all been a dream from the start. But then he saw it. On the nightstand, a single note. Scrawled in blocky handwriting, "Be back before dinner. E." Relief hit him like a tidal wave. He leaned against the doorframe and laughed softly. The kind of laugh that only comes after fear loosens its grip. He made breakfast for two that morning. Burnt toast and eggs that didn't quite come out right. Eli would tease him for it. He hoped. But dinner came. And Eli didn't. By nightfall, Dominic had checked every hallway, every room, even the attic. Rosa hadn't seen him either. There were no calls, no texts. Panic returned, slow and growing like a rising tide. And then he remembered the greenhouse. Of course, he ran. Eli was there, curled up on the floor, Marla's scarf wrapped around his fingers like a lifeline. He looked up, calm but tired, eyes rimmed red. "I didn't leave," he said before Dominic could speak. "I just needed to be where she was." Dominic stepped inside, rain dripping from his coat. "I thought I lost you," he said, breathless. "You did," Eli said softly. "But only for a little while." Dominic crouched beside him. "She loved this place," Eli continued, "even when it didn't love her back. She wanted it to," Dominic said, "and I couldn't give that to her." Eli looked over. "But you gave it to me." Dominic said nothing, just sat, just breathed. "I'm scared too, you know," Eli whispered, "that you'll change your mind, that one day I'll wake up and you'll be gone." Dominic felt something inside him snap and settle. He reached out and placed a hand on Eli's shoulder. Not tentative, not hesitant, firm, present. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Not again. Eli nodded, eyes brimming. They stayed there for a long time, rain above, roots below. In the weeks that followed, something changed. Not suddenly, not loudly, but quietly, like spring. Dominic started working from the east study, where he could hear Eli humming from the hallway. He built a new bookshelf in Eli's room. They argued over cereal brands, over bedtime, over whether horror movies were appropriate for a 10-year-old. Sometimes they didn't talk much, but they always said good night. One morning, Eli stood in front of his class at the new school. It was Family History Week. He held up the photograph Dominic once kept hidden in a drawer. Marla, holding a baby with wide eyes. "This is my mom," he said. "She's gone now, but she taught me how to be strong, how to laugh when things suck, how to stand up for people." He paused. "And this is my dad," he added, holding up a sketch Dominic had drawn. Eli in the garden, Marla's scarf trailing from his hands. "He didn't raise me, but he found me, and he stayed." That night, Dominic sat on the porch steps beside Eli. The stars were out, the greenhouse glowed faintly from a lamp inside. "I was always afraid of becoming a father," Dominic said, "because I didn't know how." Eli shrugged. "You're doing okay?" Dominic smiled. "You think?" "Yeah," Eli said. "You just burn the toast a lot." They sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full. Full of the sound of a house no longer haunted. Full of the sound of someone who had once been lost, finding his way back. And for the first time in his life, Dominic Wren didn't feel like a man hiding from his past. He felt like a father. He felt like he'd come home.